5 stars should be like, it's like winning the gold medal in the Olympics. It should be a big deal.
Not everybody can. I'm not doubting the 5 stars, but did you go straight to 5 stars?
We had criticism, interestingly, from Volvo.
Bharat NCAP was created in August 2023, and it took some months for things to get moving. But since then, the Tata Safari, Harrier, Punch EV, Nexon, Nexon EV, Curve, Curve EV, Mahindra Thar Rocks, XUV 400, XUV 3XO, B6, XEV 9e, Hyundai Tucson, Skoda Kailak, and Kia Ceros have all got 5 stars for adult and for child protection. Only the Citroën Basalt has got 4 stars for both those. So, 15 cars crash tested by Bharat NCAP since December 2023, and all of them but one have got 5 stars. Almost all of them. So the question is, are all the cars now just fantastic, or is there more to these scores that we don't know? Bharat NCAP has not been forthcoming. We have been asking, I can promise you. So I decided to get some perspective on this. So a few days ago, I attended a workshop on safety organized by the Institute of Road Traffic Education, or IRTE, and Global NCAP in Delhi. And I caught up with David Ward. Of late, we've seen a flurry of 5-star crash-rated cars coming at us from every angle. And while that's a great position that we find ourselves in as compared to 10 years ago when most cars were 0-star rated, the question now is, are we still doing this positively enough? Is it comprehensive? And what do you, as the consumer, take away from these crash ratings? Well, that becomes an essential part of the question many of you ask me, which car should I buy? And so, yes, the answer always has to be one of the safest cars you can buy. And there's a gentleman here who knows all about that, and I have learned a lot about that from him, David Ward. It's wonderful to see you. It's great when you're back in India and we can do these chats.
A pleasure always to talk to you.
Likewise. And so you heard how I set it up there. You know, there has been suddenly so much attention that has come to, especially passive safety. People feel like they have a better understanding of it now. It's certainly more widespread. The danger in that, as we have seen, has been misinformation also becoming sort of the norm. In this scenario, and with Bharat NCAP still being so young, what should we be careful about as consumers?
Well, I think first of all, you sort of said it, but it's worth repeating, is just to recognize and celebrate the huge progress over the last 10 years. The transition from really almost all cars being effectively 0 rated, no airbags and very basic occupant protection, to vehicles now that have really good standards of crashworthiness, crash protection, even 6 airbags and all the rest. So we've seen a huge step forward, and that's wonderful ultimately for Indian road users, and will contribute to helping keep loved ones safe. But in the evolution of NCAPs, what has been a very important process of all of them all around the world is to always keep pace with technology and, if you like, ahead of the game. The point of NCAPs is to be catalysts for change and encouraging technology and stretching, if you like, customer awareness of what's possible. So I think that's the next challenge, if you like, for NCAPs, and this is a challenge everywhere. Yeah. They must all upgrade periodically.
When it comes to Bharat NCAP, and like I said, it is relatively young, and at the start there was almost like, hey, you announced it, but then nothing happened, and now there's been a flurry of results. You know, you almost have one every few weeks. There is, now a question on, is it the same as Global NCAP? What was different about that, and what is different about Bharat NCAP? Basically, the confusion now, I think, that we keep getting as feedback from our viewers and consumers at large is this the real deal? I mean, should we just be buying a car that has the Bharat NCAP rating? Let me put it that way.
Well, first of all, we're hugely pleased that Bharat NCAP was formed, and I think in the first phase, The fact that it's now contributing more results is exactly what we wanted to see. So that's all very, very positive. So I think it's a little early to judge those sort of questions. But the key thing will be what happens in the next few years. The comparison I would say that's most interesting is what's happened, for instance, in the US. The US was the founder of the first ever NCAP in 1978, so they're the sort of mother of all NCAPs. It was actually started by female administrators, Joan Claybrook, so she literally was the mother of the first NCAPs. Now, in the last 15 years, US NCAP has not been upgraded at all. If you compare Euro NCAP in that period, it's been upgraded 3, I think maybe even 4 times. So a standstill that has happened to US NCAP is really bad news. It's also, there's been a standstill on regulatory initiatives as well. And what we now see is that American vehicles are basically falling behind global best practice. In fact, some of the arguments, some of the arguments you're hearing about trade access, in fact, it's been self-inflicted. It's not really unfair trade practices by Europe, Japan, or India, or anywhere. It's the fact that the US on its own has stepped back from these best practices. And so almost every car tested in the US NCAP is 5-star, when we know that they're not meeting pedestrian protection standards, for instance.
Not stringent enough.
Yeah, so they're clearly not stringent enough. Now that is definitely not the way to go with Indian NCAP. And I think that's the sort of the learning is better follow the example, for instance, of Euro NCAP or other Latin NCAP, as they all upgrade, they all innovate. And I think that's the greatest strength of NCAPs, is they can be innovators. The basic lesson is, if every manufacturer is getting 5-star results, then the protocol is perhaps not quite stringent enough, not stretching enough. 5 stars should be it's like winning the gold medal in the Olympics. It should be a big deal.
Not everybody can.
Yeah, if everybody got gold medals, would we still watch the races, the competitions? Maybe not.
Well, I mean, that's the fear, and I'll tell you, and this is partly my own assessment or my own voice, and then, like I said, I'm basing this on a lot of feedback or questions as well that come. That, like you said, if everything is getting 5 stars, is it not as stringent? Are there less teeth in this, or are we not declaring the non-5-star results? Because these are all voluntary tests. I know you don't have the actual answer to that. I mean, I want to give out that disclaimer so that nobody has a misunderstanding on why I'm asking you. But is that a fear for you as well? Because it is a fear for me.
Well, so I think for me it's a little too early to know are those issues there, and I want to give the best applause for the creation of Bharat NCAP and give them the time to bed in and establish their presence in the Indian market and as a champion of safety. So I think it's a bit early to know that.
Yeah.
If that was happening, I think it would be a mistake. But from a global NCAP perspective, we initiated the Safer Cars for India project with huge support from Dr. Balujam, the Institute for Road Traffic Education. We couldn't have done it without them. And we've seen the success that generated in improving vehicle safety has led to the creation of Bharat NCAP. But I think we just have to wait and see what happens next. But I do think the lesson is to avoid the predicament that the US has got itself into.
Yeah.
And in the end, that it's not in the interest of the manufacturers. I think there's always a tense love-hate relationship, and this applies to all NCAPs everywhere, with the community of car manufacturers. They sort of love it when they're doing well. They don't like it when they're doing badly, and NCAP is a sort of carrot and stick process. That's how the dynamic works. And I think one of the things is that the manufacturers themselves, in order to really benefit as a community from the way NCAPs work, is to allow NCAPs to be innovative. And that's the beauty of them. They can act quicker, in a more localized way, meeting Indian conditions, for instance, quicker than any regulations. So they ought to encourage that process and be relaxed about it.
No, you're right, and that's only if you take what's not a short-sighted view. I mean, it's only if you are looking at this, like you said, for the larger interest of your own development as an industry and therefore as a manufacturer. Yeah. And the reason why I have the fear that I voiced to you is while there's the thing about the carrot and stick, and there's the thing about wanting to improve your standards, etc. The minute it starts to become sexy, the minute it starts to become one of your chief marketing tools, and that everybody wants that badge, that's why I fear that the clamor to get the 5-star badge, because it's kind of strange that you've had a situation where literally every result has been a 5-star result. There's not been a 4-star, there's not been a 3-star. And to give a little context to the viewers, the reason why I said, are they not declaring the others? This is just me asking that question. I don't have any data on this. But the reason why I bring that up is because even if you look at what Global NCAP was doing, not just in India, anywhere else, any of the NCAPs, whether the test is voluntary or involuntary, once that test is done, its result has to be declared. Now, the manufacturer has been given the information prior to the public, so they have the chance to improve that rating. You can go back and say, hey, you know what, test another car. We've now added the things that we found were lacking in that last test. And that's where the relationship becomes important, because you take that analysis from Global NCAP or the testing authority, and then you try and put that back into your vehicle. So by all means, come back and try and improve your score, but both scores still get declared. That's the question I'm asking. I'm not doubting the 5 stars, but did you go straight to 5 stars? That's the question I'm asking. So, I'm just sorry, I'm giving a little context.
Yeah.
But having said all of this, as you look forward, and you've already expressed your view in terms of where you'd like to see Bharat NCAP go, and how there's this general sense that every 3 or 4 years NCAP must keep upgrading its standards to become more demanding, for the same rating. From the point of view of this becoming almost like a government role, or the government being obligated as being the harbinger, rather than this becoming like an independent safety watchdog. Does that concern you? Because so far we are seeing the government doing a lot of hand-holding and the industry kind of going along with it.
Well, I think what's interesting is there's no one model for NCAP sort of organizations
Which
anywhere.
is true worldwide, yeah.
Yeah, worldwide. So you've got some that are completely government, like US NCAP run by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Japan, it's sort of similar. But other models exist. In Euro NCAP is a multi-partner sort of cooperative setup with governments, motoring organizations, consumer organizations, and so on. And so it has that multi-stakeholder mix. Personally, I think that's the most dynamic structure. It just gives a degree of independence to the organizations. And I think it's interesting, when you look at the NCAPs around the world, the ones that are structured more like that tend to be more innovative, which I think is a good thing. But I don't think it's intrinsically inevitable that a government-controlled NCAP can't be dynamic. I think, in fact, I would say for governments, they ought to welcome the fact that they've got 2 instruments at their disposal. You've got the regulatory process, which everybody knows is a little bit slow and cumbersome, but then you've got this other wonderful instrument that you can be quite adventurous with, and you could even introduce aspects to a test just for a certain period to incentivize the market to do something. And then after a few years, all right, we've done that, we move on to something else, and you could drop it, whatever. There's a wonderful flexibility which I think governments can take advantage of. And that's what I would encourage them to do, to see the 2 instruments, regulations on the one hand and this consumer testing, as very positive interactive instruments which give them the best of all possible worlds.
That's actually a great point, and I would like to believe that these are the kind of things that Minister Gadkari would be considering anyway. We know he's proactive, so that helps. Yeah. One aspect that I know you have faced for the last 10 years of the Safer Cars for India program, there was a certain community or quarter of people who took on a little bit of an accusatory sort of a tone, and I'm not saying this was just from industry or just from media, we saw it happening from everywhere, but a certain section who said, look, it's like if you know which chapters to study for the test, then those are the ones you're going to focus on, and then of course you'll do well at the test. So, meaning that if the protocol is so well laid out that people only focus on strengthening those things when it comes to safety in a vehicle so that they score really well in these tests, but that's not a 360 view. My counter to that is that even if they're right, and if it is being done that way, you're still enhancing overall levels of safety, even if it may not be 360 in your view. But that may be a feeble argument. How do you answer those people?
Well, this actually
you know
happened.
Where I'm going with
exactly.
this.
I mean, when Euro NCAP was first established, way back around 30 years ago, we had criticism, interestingly, from Volvo. And you'd sort of think, scratching your head, hang on a minute, why is Volvo, which had this tremendous safety reputation, criticizing Euro NCAP?
This,
yeah, they should love this. And of course, they were. I have a Volvo, I have to declare it. I think the company does very well. But they were kind of showing off. And they were saying, you know, we in Gothenburg, we do all these wonderful tests, and here are these very basic Euro NCAP tests, which then were only front and side impact. You know, this is nothing, you know, compared to what we do.
Rudimentary.
And I remember sort of saying to them, but this is ridiculous. We're trying to establish a kind of core minimum which the industry as a whole should meet.
Because not everybody's doing what you're doing.
Yeah, and it will raise, if you like, all the boats in the harbour will raise
gradually
a bit. And of course, Volvo should be way out in front of all this. And yes, surprise, surprise, they were. They were the first car with the first ever 4-star car. Funnily enough, Renault beat them to the 5-star, which kind of makes me laugh. But anyway, that's all in the past. But we have resource constraints. We're not, I would love it if we could test every car in the market and we could have so many different innovative tests. That would be wonderful. But we've never had those. Euro NCAP didn't have those kind of resources. We don't have those kind of resources. So you have to make the best with what you've got and not make the best the enemy of the good, to use these sort of slogans. But so that's, I think, the realistic point. And then, of course, we have to be careful about what tests we are prioritizing against good evidence that the test standards are broad enough and applicable enough in as many markets as possible to be having an overall positive benefit. And I'm pretty confident that's the case with what we've done.
A lot of people keep asking this question, should these tests be mandatory? Should they be applicable to every car that's selling in the market, etc., etc.? Basically saying that, becomes almost like the regulation where, unless you pass this test or you get a decent score or rating, you can't sell the car. I know the answer to that is no, because the idea is for the NCAP to be removed from that sort of certification. But that said, the fact that eventually it is about the consumer's choice, and that if they would prefer to buy a car with a higher rating, and that's a question for all of you who are listening as well, and then they would reject the car that doesn't have a rating because it's not known, because the test wasn't conducted, or it's a poor score. Is that enough? You think, is that enough to say that we'll reach a scale, especially given the response of the Indian consumer and how smart they are and how quick they are to adapt as opposed to slower models in the West in the past? Do you think that's enough to say that we'll come to a point where literally every car would be tested?
I think we could get there. I'm a bit skeptical about it being mandatory, and particularly in a government program, because I think you then create really an incentive to have an unambitious test program where everybody gets 5 stars, and it becomes a kind of de facto regulation.
They want to look good.
Yeah. And I think that kind of stagnancy can get built in.
It's
That's a little bit what happened it's been happening in the US. And the US is lucky because they have another program, the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. They do their own testing independently, which helps alleviate a little bit the stagnation of the US program. But for me, the answer to this is to encourage mandatory labeling, because mandatory labeling of whichever NCAP in whichever region is available does incentivize all manufacturers to submit themselves to a test. And because it becomes a bit awkward if the car has a label and it just says
It's blank,
not available, then presumably consumers are going to say, hang on a minute,
what are you hiding?
why hasn't this car been tested?
Yeah.
And some people may say, well, some of your viewers might think, well, they're trying to save costs, and why should they be wasting the money on a crash test? Well, they are spending a lot of money on crash tests in their research facility. One additional test, which is essentially part of their kind of marketing activity, is not a big deal. I mean, we know that the good manufacturers put a lot of effort into this, and that's great. So I think labeling is the solution to this, because it will incentivize the vast majority of manufacturers to get their products tested, and it'll also be a bit of a show and tell for those that don't. Because the obvious question is, well, why haven't you done this?
And a lot of people do write in, and a lot of you have written in asking that, hey, how come you don't have results for this one? Why aren't you talking about the crash result? Where's the crash result for this car? And the answer is we don't have it, because that car wasn't crash tested. What David's saying about the labels is you are compelled then to ask that question in a way, because for those of you who are interested, you are asking the question, but a vast majority is maybe not interested, maybe not initiated, not aware. And that's where the labeling could really help, because it becomes like almost like a benchmark stand. It's like the 3-star and 5-star on an air conditioner. I mean, there are people who would willingly buy a 3-star rated air conditioner because of their usage pattern. I'm not saying you should buy a 1-star rated car, but what I'm trying to get at is that it puts context onto what that rating means, hopefully. So one last thing, there's a lot of talk about all this data that leads to the setting up of protocols. I have gone blue in the face answering the question, why is the test done at 64 kilometers per hour when accidents are happening at 120, etc. So I understand, and I've tried very hard to explain that. That's not where I'm going. But a lot of that data is historical data that is from a Western context. And today, when we've heard so many people talking about how important it is to have the data that's collected from India, with Indian road conditions and Indian traffic conditions. A lot of serious accidents, let's say in the US, may be happening on a highway, while here they may be happening on a two-way road without a median in the middle, because of the kind of infrastructure we have, which is different to other countries. Long question. The point is, how excited are you by the fact that now we are starting to finally reach scale on getting a lot of rich data from different parts of India, which is going back into places like Bosch or even the manufacturers, who are being able to then read that, develop systems or develop technologies around that, as opposed to historical data from Scandinavia or wherever?
Yeah, I mean, just on your first point, I think it is important just to address the why 64 and so on.
Yes.
And that the origins of that were, yes, it was based a little bit on crash data mainly in Western Europe, about the point at which fatal crashes clustered. But also it's a little bit to do with the whole dynamics of crumple zones and the physiology of the human body, which are more or less the same everywhere. So that I don't think it was unreasonable to choose that for such a basic thing about whether or not this body shell can survive an impact. I think what is absolutely true is that with more advanced driver assistance technologies, then there is a possibility of calibrating them much more to the road conditions all around the world that obviously differ from place to place. And I think that is very exciting. I think data offers all sorts of opportunities now to really give, in particular, NCAPs, for all the reasons I was, the inherent dynamism of an NCAP is they can tailor-make their test protocols to specific scenarios much more quickly, and maybe also in a way that regulatory standards never should. The basic idea is the regulatory standard should be a sort of minimum applicable as widely as possible. But it doesn't mean that you can't then have an NCAP which is kind of bespoke. It's like going to your posh tailors, for the best suit.
One's the threshold and onene's the benchmark, so to speak.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, I think there is a huge opportunity there, and it will in fact I think be necessary as the technologies become more and more sophisticated and more susceptible to really local conditions. So I think that's an area where NCAPs could really become centres of excellence for all the reasons
which is exciting.
Yeah.
No, and so which camp are you in terms of being optimistic about AI enhancing or speeding up some of this?
I'm more on the optimistic camp. I'm still, I know that's a slightly different question, I'm still more skeptical about full autonomy. I think there's a long pathway to go of intermediate technologies which may ultimately get us there, and maybe faster with some vehicle classes than others. Personally, I think passenger vehicles, let alone motorcycles, it's a long way off. Possibly for commercial vehicles that use dedicated routes that are entirely predictable and geofenced and all that, you can see that. So I think we're still going to see huge progress because of technology, and that does make me optimistic. And I also think that the basic lesson, which we've seen here in India, but all around the world, is that there is big public demand for this, and it sells. People will pay for it.
Yeah.
So that gives me a great sense of optimism, and a counter to the sort of inherent caution you sometimes see with some parts of industry, or indeed within some governments.
The thing about AI that excites me is not so much about the application in the vehicle, but so much about crunching some of this data and being able to deploy models which are more customizable, which are more region specific,
Yep.
and much quicker, and also maybe being able to carry out some of the testing in a quicker way using AI. So those are the things which sound really exciting.
You can sometimes overcome problems. We all know, for instance, that better speed management is a sort of the holy grail of road safety.
Yeah.
And of course, a very important issue there is the interrelationship between roads and road infrastructure and the way that speed limits are set out and what the vehicle's doing and now knowing. Now, we're going to enter an era where the quality of the physical speed limit signs just doesn't matter that much, because authorities could digitize the whole thing and the vehicle will know the speed limit, even if all the road signs have collapsed. Where my wife is half Greek, from the island of Crete, up in the mountains in Crete, one of the favorite things that farmers do, shepherds do, is do target practice with their rifles on the speed limit signs that are often completely just full of bullet holes. And which, as a road safety buff, I shouldn't laugh, but it does make me laugh. But all that is going to be made redundant if authorities have perfect digital mapping of speed limits. And so that's exactly a case where technology can actually overcome a whole lot of old-fashioned physical infrastructure problems.
Well, it's interesting. The island of Crete, nobody knew about it till the Creta came along. Now everybody knows about that little backstory. I know I could keep sort of talking with you, and I'm sure that we will have more opportunities to do that. But today the idea was to try and get some of your views on these topics, which are, evoking a lot of questions. There's a lot of interest coming from folks. So I appreciate it. I appreciate you spending some time, indulging me on this. And which is why I stepped out of the studio for this one. And it was important to get you to hear what David had to say on some of these topics, because I know some of you who have followed me have also followed him in the past. And so, again, many thanks for doing this.
Oh, thanks to you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure.